I'm delighted to be back at UCF. What a wonderful institution this is. It just keeps getting better and bigger. During my campaign for the Senate, I stopped by here often hoping that the press would think it was a big deal. And they never did. But I spent a lot of time here and in the research park, and to see the growth of this institution and now know that you're moving into Conference USA, which was one of my favorite intercollegiate activities. I just commend all of you here associated with the university, and especially your fine president, who has been here and really fostered this wonderful growth. Well, we're here this morning to talk about campaigns, and particularly the issue of campaign finance. And it's a really interesting topic. It's a changing world. When President Hitt said something about my early days, like Lou Frey, I don't know how much he raised in his very first campaign. He probably doesn't even want to talk about that. But in my first campaign for the county commission, which was about 30 years ago, I raised about $11,000. And I thought I was in hog heaven. I hated to ask people for money. It was like cutting off my hand or something to say to somebody, will you give me money for my campaign? It seemed to me to be a dirty business and something that I didn't really like doing. This year I asked Roy Lassiter if he could get me $50,000, and I didn't blink an eyelash. And he did it. In fact, along with many, many others, instead of $11,000 this year in my own Senate campaign, I raised $11 million. That's more than certainly I ever thought that I could raise. Now, a lot of it I did the old-fashioned way, by calling people on the phone and asking them for contributions. In the federal campaigns, candidates are limited to personal contributions. So there's no business out there that can bankroll a federal candidate. And there are limits on what can be raised. PACs, political action committees, can actually contribute $5,000 per election cycle and $10,000 for the entire campaign. So there's no way that there's no way that a single PAC could come and have a disproportionate impact, and I think that's good. I was counting, for instance, on the help of my teachers, teacher unions, but when all is said and done, they couldn't give any more, they couldn't contribute any more than $10,000. So if you think about that 11 million, those are a lot of individual contributions. And that has a lot to do with this panel today and how at least at the federal level, it's not true of the state level and state PACs and their roles, but at the federal level, those were the rules that we had to deal with. So I think you're beginning to understand that those candidates, at least, who are in the federal, congressional, and Senate races have to reach a very wide group of people. And the donors are limited. Therefore, the internet and earning dollars through by reaching out and telling people a little bit about your campaign, far beyond the ones that you can see in a living room. A lot of people, we did a lot of that. Let's get people together in living rooms, or let's get them together in certain places, invite people to come and hear you and contribute, and that still works. But it's very time-consuming, and it's very labor-intensive. So if you can come up with a different way of raising money and reaching out to people, it will be very, very important. I went along the old way during most of the early part of my own campaign until I met and brought on board to help me Larry Biddle, who is one of our guests this morning. Larry and Stephanie Shriak have a lot of experience in this area of modern campaign fundraising. Larry brings a background of working for not-for-profit organizations. He was not always eaten up with politics and campaigns. He was actually somebody from the Philadelphia area who spent the better part of his career raising money for charitable organizations and other not-for-profits. Stephanie's a little bit younger and came into this wide-eyed and wanting to help Howard Dean in his campaign. Larry and Stephanie both met during the Howard Dean campaign, where they honed their skills in fundraising. And with that, I'm going to let them tell you a little about their philosophy, their past in fundraising, and what they think the future holds. Larry, would you like to begin?
You can see Betty Castor is a very smart woman. Not so much because she hired me, but because, in fact, she was on that cutting edge and willing to take that risk of finding out exactly what the internet might be able to do for her campaign. And I can assure you, now that I'm in a different kind of business, which is to consult with political candidates as well as nonprofit organizations and corporations about what they can do on the internet, that she was ahead of her time again. So let me begin. We'll start with the first slide. What we thought we'd do is give you some information from a brand new Pew study. This is the Internet and Campaigns 2004, and this is brand new data. It just came out this month. So as you can see, there is a tremendous increase in and a decrease in some cases, as in the case of newspapers, in how people find their or consider their primary news source for political campaigns. Television still ranks very high. Newspapers has gone down significantly. Radio, it's eroding, and you can see that the internet is really on the rise. Next slide. It's amazing to think, and a lot of people don't know this, and particularly a lot of political candidates as well, that 75 million Americans used the internet in 2004. They got their political news, they discussed candidates and their issues, they participated in the political process, they gave money, and this represents a large percentage of the population of adults as well as a large percentage of the population, 61% of all the people online. Okay, next slide. So the power of the internet suggests that, and the numbers actually show, 52% of political news consumers said that the internet was most important in helping them decide how to vote. That's pretty powerful stuff. And we'll talk a little bit about trust issues and other issues, and most of the people in this audience probably already experienced some of these internet activities that suggest that people do trust an awful lot of information that's on the internet more than other sources. 27% said that it helped them decide who to vote for, who to vote against, and 23% said that they used the internet for their news and to engage in activities as well. Okay.
So this is a little bit of background on just how things are changing. The reason we wanted to give you those numbers is and we're looking at a group of young adults, college students, and others who are clearly more active on the internet than those of us, some of us on the stage. So you know a lot of this, and you get a lot of your information online already. But we wanted to give it a sense of that this is a significant, growing communications tool. It's a fundraising tool. It's an organizing tool. And what we saw in 2004 is just really the beginning. So I want to go into a little bit about my background is, I've been a political fundraiser for 10 years. I've started as a very traditional, high-dollar fundraiser, and then I had this wonderful experience both at the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee in 2002, when the internet was just we're realizing that there was something going on there, and nobody quite knew what it was. And then 2003 on the Dean campaign and walking through that. So what we're seeing in the fundraising world of political campaigns is really a beginning of a shift from a solely driven high-dollar fundraising focus, which Ms. Castor was talking about, it's the candidates making fundraising phone calls for hours and hours a day. I wish I could say that in 2006 that won't happen. I can't say that because it's going to be a transition time for a while. But it really was about finding those $2,000 checks, finding those folks who could raise $50,000, $100,000. It is very, very time consuming for our candidates, for all elected officials today. You know, you build finance committees. I think the most well-known still today is the Bush-Cheney 04 operation, which they also did in 2000, which was this incredible organization of high-dollar fundraising committees. They're Mavericks, they're Rangers, and they're Pioneers. And they had people raising so much money from their friends, colleagues, and neighbors that they actually had to add a group in 2004 called the Mavericks that went above there. I mean, I believe in 2000, if I remember correctly, the Pioneers were raising $50,000 each, and the Rangers $100,000. They added another level of folks who were able to raise $250,000 themselves. That's like going to one of you and saying, would you raise me $250,000? They had a chunk of those folks. And it's just kind of peer-to-peer asking people for $2,000 checks. There's also the typical high-dollar fundraising of, you know, people talk about the rubber chicken dinners. You know, you pay for, you know, $250 a ticket, you come in, you get to see the candidate, a little, you know, hoopla on the stage, you get a relatively cheap dinner where you get to sit with 10 people around the table in a full big ballroom. You have galas, retreats, and a lot of the phone calls. Oh, I'm sorry. So that was, so that's a lot of the high-dollar fundraising, and as I said, that's not going to disappear anytime soon. But what we're seeing is a new transition with the increased look at small-dollar fundraising. It's been direct mail and telemarketing for decades now, and the direct mail, particularly on the Democratic side, is getting better and better. The Republican side was ahead on really expanding those lists. And now it's about the internet and moving those folks. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to do a quick overview on the Dean for America campaign and kind of a snapshot of what happened on that campaign and why things popped when they popped. What you see in online fundraising is a growth of an online community. And when it comes to the Howard Dean for President campaign, that campaign started out in January of 2003 as a very, very long shot campaign. In fact, when I left Washington, D.C. to move to Burlington, Vermont, I was told by a number of my colleagues at the time, many of them working for John Kerry, that was going to be the end of my career. Fortunately, as the finance director, it ended up being one of the best things I could have ever done. And a lot of it was because of this energy that was starting to occur. So we started with an online list in January, and we don't even have that part on, but really January, February, March of 2003. There was a little bit of money coming online, which at the time was highly unusual. In 2002, for a United States Senate campaign, a significant Senate campaign, you were lucky to see any money coming online, particularly if it was just coming without being solicited. So it was starting to brew, and then as things started to move, in February and March, you had the beginning of the Iraq War and the anti-war movement looking for somebody to get behind. That was a big drive. You get into May and June, which was the big push on June 30th of 2003, when the Dean campaign went from just nobody even knew who we were to a $7 million+ quarter, much of it driven online. And there's a big growth on the list from a tiny list of less than 1,000 people, and in 6 months to 152,000 people who had come and joined the list. These aren't lists that we bought and put in. These are people that came and signed up and became part of this growing online campaign. That continued through the summer with a very, very proactive campaign. All aspects of our campaign were focused on expanding that community. By September 30th, as you can see, it was 443,000 people on that email list, people who had signed up. By November, it was 510,000. By the end of the campaign for Dean, on February 18th, when he withdrew from the race, that list had gotten to 630,000 people in really a 15-month period. Next slide, please. So how did that happen? Sometimes you just have to build everything and hope that some things click. I think campaigns are about preparing and building, and the other pieces, there's a little bit of luck always kind of necessary. And Howard Dean was in the right position at the right time. One, the anti-war movement, the peace movement in the United States, which had been really very quiet for many, many years, really stepped up and woke up with the invasion of Iraq. So that was a big push. The online buzz and the kind of first time this was happening effect, everybody was very curious. So we gained a lot of traffic online just from kind of the curiosity factor. We also really proactively worked with the mainstream media to get press stories and television stories and newspaper stories to drive traffic to the website. I can't talk enough about MoveOn.com. You could probably have a whole section on what they have done for American politics today, but MoveOn.com in June of 2003 did a very unusual thing as a progressive political organization with a very sizable email list decided that they were going to have a vote. And I don't know if how many remember this. It was kind of early on and it was a little bit under the radar. But what they did was they had a vote amongst their 2 million members that asked, who would your presidential Democratic primary preference be? In that process, we gained, that was actually probably our biggest growth spurt in a single, just a few day period, was that vote in June of 2003. Clearly, as the election went on, they did a lot more with John Kerry and many of the Senate candidates they have supported, including here in Florida. The other piece of it is just the interest of the outsider, underdog candidate versus the inside establishment, kind of that ultimate battle that everybody wants in a campaign, and you always want to be kind of the outsider. Well, that really was a significant piece of this as well, particularly with we're talking about folks who communicate online. They tend not to be, well, and this is changing, but we were initially talking about folks who were very well educated and reading a lot of different information from a variety of sources online. You can go to the next slide. So that was kind of how it all built. Some of the things that we used to increase all that was allowing the online community to get active, not just online, but offline, in their communities, in their neighborhoods. So the question became for our campaign, and I think the question is going to become for all candidates running in the coming years, is can a modern day campaign let people, just regular people, self-organize? And I think the answer is yes, and I think that's how the political process is ultimately going to change, is allowing people to get involved and really start doing things on their own. And Dean for America had organizations in all 50 states that were self-organized. I mean, we didn't have staff in 50 states. These were folks who took upon themselves to set up their own organization, do their own lit drops, talk to their neighbors, do their own campaigning. They raised money, they did house parties, and that's something that I think already we're seeing is going to remain in our political system, and more participation can never be a bad thing. Part of also what helped that grow was a group called Meetup.com, which was pretty new at the time and really popped in 2003, which was allowing folks to, it was a tool to allow people to self-organize, and ultimately 160,000 Americans joined meetups in their local areas, which were just local meetings the first Wednesday of every month. They still have them, actually, not quite 160,000 people, but there's still a pretty, I'm always amazed, actually, how many people still go on Wednesday nights, because it's their community now. It's kind of what they do on the first Wednesday night of the month, and they still do political activities. And so that's that piece. If you can go to the next slide, please. This is just kind of the growth of the meetup members. It started basically from 0 to 160,000. You can go ahead. This is a quick picture of how the fundraising changed. Carey, Lieberman, Edwards, Gephardt, Clark came in late, but that's the second quarter, second quarter of 2003 fundraising numbers versus the third quarter of 2003. And what you see with the Dean campaign is that complete explosion that was driven by online fundraising, whereas our opponents at the time were very much doing rubber chicken dinners and fundraising committees and just were not able to get that energy online. You can go to the next. This, and forgive me, the fourth quarter, for being a technical person, I was having technical problems and couldn't get the fourth quarter up. But this is a quick snippet of what it looked like on the campaign and where the money was coming from. Now, ultimately, we ended up with about 425,000 contributions with over 300,000 unique donors. So we had a number of donors who gave numerous contributions, repeat donors. Of that, 189,000 were online donations. What you're seeing there as well is that there's still, even on the Dean campaign, that online fundraising campaign, you still had a significant piece that came from traditional sources. And traditional sources here are defined as candidate solicitation events, and also direct mail, which is a pretty significant piece of this campaign. You can go ahead. This is just a kind of a quick, interesting picture of early 2003 for the third quarter and seeing the difference. The most significant piece of this at the time, and this kind of held true throughout the way for Bush, President Bush's numbers are in the red, the first column. And you can see most of his donors were $2,000 check writers. Where you see the absolute opposite end is the Dean campaign, where most of our donors were under $200, and just kind of where those people were coming from. Of course, now with President Bush at this time, he was raising significant dollars in 2003 and was outraising all of us put together on the Democratic side. But you can see a lot of how our opponents were still doing a lot of the higher dollar fundraising as well. You can go to the next. And just to transition, so that's the snippet of the Dean campaign. Now, what is amazing to me still today, because I was looking at these numbers yesterday again, and it's just shocking. John Kerry's campaign, well, the Dean campaign raised $52 million in 15 months. John Kerry had raised $40 million by about the time Howard Dean left the campaign. So it was 52 to 40 million. Keeping in mind that by the time he'd raised that 40 million, he'd won Iowa, New Hampshire, and gone through February 3rd. So he was on his way to being the nominee. In the next 6 months, he raised $210 million in 6 months. Much of that, nearly 100 million came straight through online small dollar contributions. The direct mail also expanded. There was a significant high dollar, $2,000 piece of that as well. But those numbers are still astonishing to me. But what we were able to do on the Dean campaign and what Move On was able to do was kind of gin up that online energy. So when the time did come and there was a full-on nominee, those folks were ready to go, and they backed, they backed the candidate, the nominee. So that was the 6 months in 2004. Now, President Bush raised $292 million in total. A good chunk of that came in 2003, when he had time to not have to worry about anything but fundraising, and well, and running the country, to be fair. So there's that. So those numbers are quite astonishing. And then, of course, the general election money. And this is just money that was raised and spent in the primary, by the way. And the general election money, comes from public financing, which is each candidate receives $74 million in the general. But when you think that in that primary season, that's the kind of money that was raised and spent in a 2-year period. And those are pretty astonishing numbers. You can go ahead.
So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the power of the internet and, in fact, what people were doing on the internet and how many of those were doing it. So you can see there that people were researching candidate positions. 34 million people did that. There was a lot of political comedy going around on the internet. As you know, there's a lot of audaciousness that occurs on the internet, which makes it kind of fun. And in fact, a lot of people like that. 32 million of those people in 2004 liked it a lot. So there also was some seriousness in that they researched the candidate's voting record. They were looking at, they were also taking, there was polls that were online and gave opportunities for people to express themselves. And there was research on endorsements and organizations that supported candidates, wanting to know who they were and, you know, how they lined up with what it is the philosophy of the person looking at the candidates was about. Election day voting information, which is pretty critical. Where to vote and when to vote was really a tremendous number of people that were looking for the internet to supply that kind of information. They also joined in political discussions and chats, and as Stephanie has talked about, they contributed money online. 4 million of those people did that. If I think that's the number, I can't see it, but I think that's the number. That's very significant. That's very significant stuff. So building an online community, that's what we talk about, all of this. This is a community of people who are many to many, not one-to-one, but many to many. We're going to talk some more about that in a minute. The building of the community, people become more involved, they become more invested. The money from these people becomes much more important to them. They understand what the money's for, and many times we were very specific, particularly in Betty's campaign, very specific about what it is we were asking money from people to support her and her campaign. So it empowered people to feel that they were much more connected to the financial results in their support of candidates, which was really kind of another new phenomenon. Instead of just giving to a candidate, you were really giving to something a lot more specific. And that's been driving a lot of the donations over the last year, the cycle. So what's happening now is that people were giving, and they were asked to give through email. They would tell a friend, they'd forward it. They call it viralizing, sort of unpopular word, but in fact it does describe what happens here, that people move it around to their friends, and people who call their friends friends are usually very much like themselves. And so they often, of course, think very much like they do. It's likely that the person's going to open that email when it's forwarded by a friend, and they will believe, particularly when it's forwarded by a friend, much more of the information that's contained in it. There's also a tremendous influx of advertising on Betty's campaign. We did very significant advertising about what was happening in her campaign to Democratic, particularly blogs and websites. We have Google keywords so that actually if you went to see Mel Martinez's name on Google before he became a senator, you would also see on the side a little advertisement for Betty Castor's website. And then there's the website itself. People were interested in what was happening on the website, and they got excited enough about that too. But these are all tools that work to build this community of people that somehow felt that they were connected to each other because regardless of which candidate they supported that candidate, and they felt they were part of a community to do that. So online activities include contributions, petitions about particular subjects, about particular issues. Please sign this petition if you support this issue. Pass it on to your friends. Team raisers, where you can set up your own page, your own web page. You can send it to your friends and ask them to make contributions to the candidate on your behalf. And the little thermometer pops up, how much money is given, even by whom, if the person wants to have their name listed in that page. Blogging is becoming a huge part of what's happening in the future. It's a huge part of what's happening in the present right now. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Meetup and other kinds of local organizing things, and house parties included in that. Those viral activities that I talked about in advertising as well. Okay? So what's next? There's a tremendous expansion in the blogging community. For those of you who don't know what a blog is, which is probably a very small number of people in this room, it is a website that is set up specifically for the purpose of an individual or group of individuals that collectively want to view that blog to write a daily diary. It's usually 250 words or so about what's happening in that person's life, usually related to a topic that is the purpose and the topic within the blog itself. What does happen is that the person who has the blog can also put URLs of addresses, email, internet addresses for people to go to other blogs that may be related to the story or the content of that particular daily diary. Lots more targeted advertising is possible now. For instance, on AOL, you can get very specific about the audiences that you can advertise to. And lots of other ISPs are now providing the opportunity for you to select out whether it's women and what category and where they live and so forth. You can be very selective about your advertising, which is obviously good for the purposes of getting specific. But it's also important because the price of advertising on the internet is now quadrupling very fast. All of a sudden people are realizing that there's some value in that, and that's another way in which you can spend less money and get better results. Podcasting is really new. Anybody in here ever listen to a podcast? 1, 2, 3, 4? That's great. I would expect the university folks to do that. Podcasting is now happening. It's, you can take your iPod and you can pull down a radio broadcast. In fact, the company that I work for, Echo Ditto, has a studio, one of the first studios, if not the first studio, in the United States. And we have people come by, broadcast. We put it up on the internet. People can pull it down, put it on their iPod, and when they want to hear it, they can hear it at the gym or whatever their time of listening wants to be. And citizen journalism. People are now providing journalistic content, which there was some in the last cycle that eventually bubbled up into the mainstream journalism, as you probably all know about. But that citizen journalism is another opportunity for people to express themselves, to make their opinions known, and to sort of cite things as journalism, although not necessarily with all the journalistic integrity that journalists have to withstand. Next slide. So here are the numbers on the blog, just so we can give you some sense of impact here. Right now there are 32.4 million people on, and I think that number is 62.5 million are expected very soon to be on the blog. There are 8 million blogs. There are 23,000 new blogs every single day. It's huge. It's just absolutely big. And it's happening, and people are pushing around information, going to these blogs, and it's big stuff. It's really interesting. And it's a way for people to express themselves. And how many people here have a blog? Well, you can see, according to these numbers, that's probably going to double the next time we meet and talk together. Next slide, please. The thing about the blog is that it is a word-of-mouth process. It's very, very trusted because usually the people who go to that can listen and watch the language and believe or not believe, and pretty soon you all of a sudden realize if somebody's trying to spoof you out or say something that's a lie or whatever, you can begin to figure out who that person is. And many times bloggers will say, "Get off this blog, you liar." It gets kind of audacious again, a little bit direct. But in any case, it's really true. It does have a trust level that's very, very valid in the communities, and much more so than any other kind of information at the present time. So you can do viral research. It's very inexpensive, and it's very measurable. You can find out how many people go to it, where they come from, how they get there, where they go next, all kinds of things like that. The metrics on the internet are huge, very important, and very real. Thank you. So the disposable income of people who are on the blog, $57,900, that's the average. 50% of them consider themselves natural opinion leaders. Why else would you do that, I think?
What we did at the end was something I wanted everybody to realize is a lot of this is all about political fundraising, but there's other things that are starting to happen. The amount of money that's coming through online sources for charities is going up dramatically. And charities, I have to say, in most cases, not all, there's some that are very much on the front lines of this, but a lot of them are very, very far behind. And part of what Larry and I are doing in our work now is talking to these organizations and trying to get them to make that change as well. What we're going to show you are substantial numbers through a month period after the tsunami hit. The tsunami hit in December, and within a month, nearly $1 billion came through online sources for different organizations. And I mean, there were like Doctors Without Borders. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. It's a great, fantastic organization. 87% of their money came over the internet. They were flooded. And they were almost, well, their site had crashed a number of times, and through the work of a variety of people kept up. But being prepared for when that moment hits, God forbid it's that kind of situation, good or bad, that the website for your charitable organization, for your campaign, for your business needs to be prepared and ready for that moment, because it happens on the turn of a dime. And it's really quite amazing what is going on, and that people really do feel that they are part of a larger world community, that when the time comes and when they are needed, they do step up, and the best way to communicate is many through many on the internet, through those blogs and through those sites. And citizen journalism also took a huge peak during the tsunami. The best video that was shown, including on CNN and Fox News and MSNBC, came from some citizen journalists, some people on the ground who had their, whether there be their cell phone cameras or video cameras, to get that footage. Because I mean, there's no news entity now that can cover everything in the world. So it's really, we're starting to see a change of populism, journalism, and fundraising and activity worldwide. So it's a fascinating area. It's a great time.
We'd had a couple of decisions early on, 1996, 1997, where we were starting to apply the same rules to the internet that we applied to television, newspapers, and so on like that. And after 3 or 4 such decisions, we realized we were starting to lay a pretty heavy regulatory load over the internet. And so, for instance, Philip mentioned toner cartridges. We had one decision that said, well, if somebody puts up a website on the internet that asks for support of one candidate, they're going to have to figure out how much of their electric bill and how much of the cost of their computer and all these other supplies were allocable to that, and that was then going to fall under the federal election finance rules. And after we looked at a couple of decisions like that, we thought this is simply going to strangle political activity on this new medium that my commission wanted to encourage, and so we decided not to regulate it. And after the McCain-Feingold bill passed in 2002, we extended that treatment, and we actually passed a regulation that said, essentially, political activity on the internet is not subject to these new campaign finance rules. Now, Senator McCain, Senator Feingold, and the House sponsors didn't like that. They sued us, and a federal judge decided that the commission was wrong and ordered us, as now a few months ago, to go out and write regulations governing political activity on the internet. And we began that process last week. This is going to be a very big challenge, and it could represent very big changes in some of the things you were hearing about on the last panel because of the high volume of political activity that goes on the internet, and because of the huge differences between the internet and other mediums of political campaigning. I just want to emphasize that it's not our fault. We took another choice. The specific legal question before us is in the law. It regulates what are called public communications, and public communications are defined in the law as broadcast, billboard, direct mail, phone bank. Okay, those are all four familiar political technologies, or any other form of general public political advertising. And what the judge said was, well, you can't just exclude the internet, and so you have to go out and get advertising on the internet. And the first big threshold question we reached was, well, does that mean everything on the internet or only some things? Because some people wanted to analogize the internet, say a website, to a billboard, and say, in essence, anything you put up on the internet was general public political advertising, which would have had sweeping effects. Instead, we have issued a regulation that focuses on what is advertising on the internet. Okay, the annoying pop-ups, the spam emails, the banner ads that somebody pays for, and so on like that. So we are going through that process right now. There was discussion of the regulation of bloggers, and in my view, there's no particular reason in reading the law as to why bloggers should be exempt. Let me give you an example. Tom DeLay has become a rather polarizing figure these days, and there are probably people in the room who like him a lot, people in the room who dislike him a lot. But there's now a website up dedicated to defeating Tom DeLay. And they're out there raising money to defeat Tom DeLay. They're recruiting candidates to work against him. They're trying to sign up volunteers in his Texas House district to work against him. They're spreading unfavorable material about him. And the question is, well, why isn't that a PAC, a political action committee, just like anyone else, which has to register with the Federal Election Commission, limit its receipts to permissible sources, $2,000 a person, and so on like that, just like everybody else? And the only answer that anyone can give is, well, it's on the internet, and the internet is different. And you have to say, well, why? And so we are probably going to be moving into a system in which internet activity was explicitly exempt from regulation, into a system where it is at least partially regulated. And that will make a very big difference, because there are a lot of people who are very hopeful that my commission will do a sensitive, delicate, careful job of regulating. And my experience in the government is that often, very unintentionally, we have, you've heard of the hidden hand of the market. Well, there's an analogous economic term of the hidden boot of the government. And very often, while we commissioners may have the best of intentions, we don't understand things very well. We're not internet experts. We're not the people who are out there doing campaign activities, and will pass a regulation intending one thing and creating something, creating an effect quite a bit different. And the huge change on the internet is simply going to be this. Up until now, if someone was contemplating political activity on the internet, and for instance, all of those local groups described by the Dean campaign, and somebody asked, well, is this regulated? The answer was no. It was clearly no, unambiguously no, and so they could go out and do whatever they wanted. In the future, the answer is going to be, well, it depends. And the problem with that is that that's going to squelch local initiative and individual activity and so on like that, because if you then tell somebody, well, it depends on who owns the computer, for instance, which is one of the things. There's an exemption in the Act if you use personal property that you own. Well, of course, a lot of people use their computers at their workplaces, or they use computers supplied by their educational institutions or other things for blogging and for other purposes. And so I'm very unenthusiastic about this job. And for those of you who are interested about this aspect of the job, I should say, I'm not resigning yet. And so for those of you who are interested in internet political activity, you really should look on our website at fec.gov and look at that rulemaking and encourage people to send in comments so that if we have to complete this unwelcome job of regulating internet political activity, we can do it in the least damaging way possible. Thank you.
Well, I think you already realize the immediacy of the internet and the policy implications and the implications for charitable giving far beyond any political campaign is just tremendous. When my campaign ended unsuccessfully, Larry was still with me, and we put our heads together and said, how can we take advantage of the the capacity that we have as a campaign. So we turned our effort into a political action committee around issues and named it the Campaign for Florida's Future. And we have used our email capacity to email people who we know share some of our views, and we picked an issue that we thought would be of great interest to all voters in Florida, and that's the issue of redistricting. I don't know how many of you in this room are familiar with that term, but I just want to take a minute to tell you that in the last election cycle, not one member of the legislature, in the House or the Senate, not one incumbent member was defeated. Add to that the fact that not one incumbent in Congress was defeated. And you have to start asking yourself, is it because we think that everyone in the legislature is doing such a good job? Is it because we think everyone in the Congress is doing such a good job? And then you look behind that and you see a combination of factors, but the most important factor is that the people who now draw the legislative districts are legislators themselves. Legislators are choosing their voters rather than voters choosing those legislators. So we have started a petition campaign for a constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot in '06 that would provide standards for political districts. They would provide a nonpartisan commission to draw those districts, and they would have elections under those new districts immediately. This is a subject which is very well suited to the internet because people can go to the sites, they can get all the information they need, they can draw down petitions themselves and sign them and mail them in. And it's because of the immediacy of the internet and the ability of the internet to do that. Well, I wanted to add that as the price of my coming across I-4 today, and also to ask you if I know you have some opinions, but more than that, you may have some questions for Stephanie or for Larry, or you may want to just tell us what you're thinking of the capacity of the internet in the future in campaigns or in your personal lives.
Just a quick point of clarification about the rulemaking process that's ongoing. We're in a comment section period of time right now, and do you know exactly how long that period of time is going to last and so forth?
When the federal agencies issue a rulemaking, they issue what's called a notice of proposed rulemaking, which is, according to law, has to be published in the Federal Register, which looks like a very fat newspaper, but in fact we put it on the internet, so you can find that on our internet site. And it's open for comments for 60 days from about now. It really depends on the publication date in the Federal Register. We will then be having a hearing at about the end of June, where we'll take testimony on it, and then we will consider all the public comments and the testimony and attempt to issue a final rule probably by about September.
What's your opinion of the fact that the American public in general may be too ignorant to discern the information on the internet as being factual or coming directly from the candidate? And along with that, how is the candidates themselves taking steps to prevent infiltration of scammers and like hackers and things like that from taking over these internet sites?
The fact of the matter is that there isn't a way to censor the internet, and I think that actually it's very difficult to do that, and there are some scams. There were some in the last campaign where bloggers, for instance, were paid and where websites were thought to be presented as, citizens presenting them on their own will, when in fact it was really a behind-the-scenes activity and strategy by a campaign. But I think the answer to your question is the sort of ultimate question of how well we trust this democracy. And ultimately, of course, that means how well we trust the people and how well we trust each other. And what actually happens to a large degree, although there is no guarantee, which is why I think so many times People spend a lot of time on the internet and actually believe more than they do from the candidate what other people say about the candidate, and then therefore is told to them by their friends. There's just a self-censorship about that, and there's a lot of conversation, as you know, if you've been on the internet, particularly in the blogosphere, that people have about this is just not true, and these facts, these positions that you take are not, are not correct. It's different than saying I don't agree with you. That's entirely different. And I think candidates are actually moving further away from trusting that people will actually believe them all the time. And that's why the blog community is growing so much for candidates. More candidates are creating blogs and encouraging blogs, and sometimes even blogging themselves, so that it creates this conversation, because the conversation itself, ultimately, if you read it, if you listen to it, and you think about it enough, you'll decide what's actually right or wrong.
What do you think of Dean as the chair of the DNC? And secondly, how do you explain the growth of the internet in 2004 and couple that with, and I hope this doesn't offend you, the losses, the dramatic losses that the Democrats did face in the 2004 election cycle with the dramatic growth of the internet, growth of the internet? Like, how do you explain the correlation between the two?
Well, the first part on Howard Dean being chair of the DNC, I think is fantastic, but you're talking to two really biased people here. I mean, as for any party committee, particularly I would say both, but I mean, if the Republicans had lost as the Democrats had lost, and we're not talking, I mean, this was a close election, no matter how you look at it. I mean, yes, we lost. The Democrats lost a lot of different seats, but not by huge, gigantic margins. If the Republicans had taken that defeat, they would be very much in the same boat today. And instead of having a fight with their progressive wing, as the Democrats have this battle between the progressive liberal wing and the conservative moderate wing, they would be having a fight with their moderate wing and their religious right wing. The parties are in very tenuous spots right now. We're holding together very loosely, which is partially why I think this time period with the internet is so very important to our democracy, that it becomes much more about the people, the American people, really getting involved again every day of their lives and becoming part of the process. We built an entire nation as a democracy. And though it's become a republic where we elect people to represent us, that doesn't mean we don't hold them accountable. We have to, that's our responsibility. And the internet allows us a way to communicate with each other, to try to get the truth, because campaigns are about branding and marketing a candidate. But politics and government is about representing the people. And the people are going to have to take that back, because the campaigns have really taken a turn for the marketing piece. On your other question in regards to, I think it's the loss, and if the internet, how that change happened. I think the amount of energy that happened in 2004, both financially and on the ground, on both sides, just shows the interest of getting back involved in government. And if the internet had not been a tool to be used, I'm afraid to even think what would have happened to the Democrats, because you would have knocked out $100 million. Actually, what would have happened, I'll tell you this on the financial piece, what would have happened is Howard Dean and John Kerry would not have opted out of the matching fund, which means they would have been limited to whatever the number was. I don't even know the number because we opted out so early, but it would have been about a $45 million primary. We would have been up against the $275 million of Bush as Democrats. So the internet did open up a whole avenue for us to, as Democrats, to finally become equal. I mean, the Democratic National Committee outraised the Republican National Committee. And a huge chunk of that has to do with the online community. So I think it's a good thing. I think it will continue, but the battle's just begun.
Florida is a very divided state politically. The majority of voters, the largest percentage of voters are still registered Democratic, about 41%. 38% are registered Republican. But the growing independent voter that registered independent is the fastest growing group of Floridians. So I predict that elections, if our districts were fair and competitive, which they're not, our districts are not, legislative districts are, as I've already pointed out, drawn to favor the incumbents. If we had competitive elections, we'd probably have a much more competitive legislature, and I think that those independent voters are going to play more and more of a significant role in Florida elections.
Just real quick on that point, do you think that proportional representation, if we had that instead of the single-member districts, do you think that could be an answer? Or do you think we would ever have a proportional representation system in our country?
I'm not sure how you're explaining proportional, but
like 45% of the vote gets the Democrats, they get 45% of the seats.
That would be hard to guarantee in any election, because people, even in my own race, people cross party lines. There were Democrats that voted for Mr. Martinez. There were Republicans that voted for me. So a lot of people are, my own philosophy of partisan politics is that you've got 20% on both sides that are going to vote party line regardless of what. And then there are the other people in the middle that can be persuaded. And I think more and more what we've got to get to in this state, I firmly believe, are elections that are competitive, so that you don't have people that run, and both parties are guilty of this. We have parties with Democratic majorities. One of our congressional seats has 250,000 Democrats and 30,000 Republicans. What's fair about that? You disenfranchise all of the Republicans in that district. Another district, you disenfranchise the Democrats. That's unfair. We need to start allowing someone other than the people who are in office to draw those districts. Thank you for giving me a chance to harangue again.
We're talking about this increase of the blogging, the increase of podcasting, and we thought that was going to be a direct increase in the number of youthful voters. That didn't pan out. So how would you respond to this youth movement that was active online, active donating, but not active voting?
Well, actually, we had more youthful voters in Florida than ever before.
But nationwide, we had the same number we did in...
It's true.
Same
Same percentage.
Same percentage.
Yeah.
But I found much more interest, especially on college campuses. I'm sure that it was true here at UCF than we've seen in Florida in recent history, and more voting. But of course, compared to Florida's senior population, there's no comparison.
I wish I did know the answer to that, because I always feel it's such a disappointment to not think about being a part of this country in a way that you can shape and form it and express that by voting the future of your life and your children and whatever. I think, however, that what may beginning to happen here is that I don't know whether this is true or not. I feel like that most young folks feel that either that in fact is not relevant to them, and they feel a disenfranchisement for a variety of reasons. And I think that the internet, with Rock the Vote and some other organizations, Move On and so forth, are beginning to see already that people are coming in, more and more young people are coming into their sites, in sort of traditional sites. Even AARP has the number of young people who are below the age of 50 has increased 30% on their site. And the reason for that is that the young folks are now beginning to worry about the economic infrastructure of this country and what it means to their future. And so they're beginning to activate and beginning to get involved, and hopefully that'll turn into and translate into voting.
This internet thing and listening to this and the 23,000-day bloggers that are joining in that, when you come up with these rules, and I know you're reluctant to do it, I don't know how the hell you're going to enforce them. I mean, you know, 2/3 of the young people here you're going to have to put in jail. you know, it seems to me it's just an impossible task. And the second part, and I'll go back, and Phil, I'd like to ask you that if I'd like to get your impact, which nothing has been said at all about the internet in England.
Well, yes, policing is a big problem on the internet. In fact, I gave a talk like this to a Politics Online conference a couple of weeks ago, and one popular blogger who's got a very effective political site came up to me and he says, well, I just want to know if I'm going to have to leave the United States. Because if I have to keep up, and he was a very committed political activist, and he said, if I have to move to Canada or somewhere else to keep doing what I do, I'm going to do it. So it is a big problem. What we have focused on is advertising. In other words, the position that we've taken is basically, okay, yes, we will agree that everybody who runs a blog is part of the media, just like the newspaper. And if it's your own opinion that you're putting up there, fine, you're a publisher. But a lot of these blogs, and more than you would expect, it costs $3,000 to put an ad on Daily Kos, which is one of the most popular political sites on the internet. It costs $2,000 to put an ad on Instapundit, which is another big popular site. There are thousands of small sites that will take ads, and there's actually a place called blogads.com, and you can go see them all and get the rates. And so essentially what we've tried to do is focus our regulation on that, which even then the bloggers don't like it because you know, people talk about the internet as a low-cost medium of communication, but in fact it's not. The marginal costs are very low, the cost of posting one more message or sending one more email. But the cost of having a large server capacity for a popular blog is very, very expensive. And the popular bloggers want to be able to recoup some of that. And the way they do it is sell ads. And if they can sell a bunch of $100 ads, you know, they've made several $1,000s for their server capacity. And so even that the bloggers are upset about. But that's how we're trying to limit our regulation in a way that makes sense.
In the UK, certainly internet use is growing too. And indeed, this morning, I checked in, my service called NTL World has got an advert on its site for the Liberal Democrats. Now that kind of party expenditure would just come under the standard party expenditure limits, and you would have to declare all your expenditure, all be accounted for, and it would be part of your total limit. Candidates do have personal sites as well, and if they are used for electioneering, the costs of building a website or maintaining a website during the election campaign period would have to be included in your expenses. But I'm sure there will be lots and lots of grey areas that there'll be some difficulty in quite sorting out.
Howard Dean, as you said, did some amazing things and amazing feats in fundraising, but one of the criticisms towards the end of the campaign was, where did it all go? I can remember a few weeks where the news was running stories that he's not even going to be able to pay staff. And I was wondering if this new form of fundraising in some way makes candidates complacent of their funds. If they don't have to do the calls and the rubber chicken dinners, are they more willing to spend it faster and just assume that the funds are going to keep coming in? And if not, then where did all Howard Dean's money go?
It is all about the campaign team and the management. The candidate, of course, has a responsibility to keep tabs on what is going on. But if the campaign structure, I'm going to try to say this as gently as possible, Howard Dean did not lose because he ran out of money. Howard Dean lost because of some issue positions and poor organization, particularly in Iowa. I mean, he lost in Iowa and ended in Iowa. We knew that it was all about Iowa. We knew that going in. And so we threw good money after bad money in a state that we knew whoever was going to win Iowa was going to win the day. And whether we had 10 million less or even if we had 10 million more, we probably would have done the same thing. What I think it does show is you can't buy it. You just cannot. At the end of the day, we can raise, John Kerry can raise $225 million. You still can't buy it if you don't have everything else in place. A strong campaign organization, a solid candidate, and everything else that goes with it. So as much as and that's what gets back to, we can keep throwing money at this thing, and we will, because that's the way it's set up right now. but it's still about the organization and the strength
It's about
of
the
it.
candidate.
And yes.
Yes.
I'm not real clear about the blogging and so forth, because I've never used it in that potential. I'm usually voting directly, you know, the normal way. But my question is, I'm learning as I mature. What my question is, do you foresee any kind of a way that there might be a limiting in the way the campaign finance money is addressed to both sides of the aisle? In other words, do you foresee in the future that perhaps maybe Congress might want to try to limit, you know, the amount of money that's donated to get these elections off the ground, so to make it a little more fairer?
I think that you got a representative of the FEC here, so you could ask him about that. But I do think, I think that what drives in this country the issues that I think the FEC struggles with, and I think the media struggles with, and I think I think about it a lot too, and that's the whole issue of free speech. Free speech in this country has a kind of sacrosanct, as it should have, place in our world, and it allows things that are good and allows things that are bad, allows things that we don't like and things that we do like. And I think that's what drives a lot of the struggles with regulation, because regulation sooner or later ends up being an issue of free speech. Do I think it's going to change? I wish it would. I doubt very much